Hello and welcome to part 5 of building a TARDIS in Blender. And this one might be a bit tricky to follow along with because we're going to be creating the materials and some of them are a little bit in depth. So if you need me to go over anything again or if you need to pause and rewatch, please do. If you need me to go over anything again, just let me know and I'm happy to give it a go. But this one can be a little bit tricky, so do bear with me on this. So for the TARDIS, we need to create a painted wood, and we need to create one going up and down and one going side to side. But we're going to create them both out of the same material setup. So let's do the vertical wood grain first. So let's just click, I don't know, one of these poles or columns, whatever I've called them. We've still got the mirror modifier active, which is fine. We don't need to change that at the moment. So let's go over to our material. We're going to create a new material, and let's call this TARDIS Wood Vertical. Now, brace yourselves. So let's go into our shading workflow. And then, as you can see, it's just got the white Blender default material applied to it. Now, what I would highly recommend doing, in fact, what I would say is an absolute must, is to make sure that you've got Node Wrangler enabled. If you don't, go over to Edit, and then Preferences, and then type in Node Wrangler. And what Node Wrangler allows you to do is easily connect and disconnect nodes. So I'll show you as we're doing it. Now, what we're going to start with, sorry, I've got this all in a little screenshot in front of me. We're going to start by creating the wood texture, and then we're going to pop some little knots into the wood. This is very, very inspired by a tutorial by Ryan King. So if it seems familiar for something you've done before or seen before, that's why. I can't take credit for this really. But we are going to start by adding a Voronoi texture. So let's just go Shift and A, search for Voronoi. And then let's just drag that there. And then with it selected, we're going to press Control and T, and that adds a texture coordinate and mapping node. Now, easiest way of seeing what this looks like, we're going to Control, Shift, and click the Voronoi texture, and that plugs it into the material output over here. And you can see straight away, we've got these vertical lines going up and down. Let's just box select these and move them out the way. So we need to change what this looks like. So what we are going to do, and it sounds really, really strange, is we're going to add another mapping node. So in fact, let's change this texture coordinate here. We're going to change it from generated to object. We're going to plug the object into the vector of the mapping node. So now that changes the look of everything a little bit. Then we're going to grab our mapping node, press Shift D to duplicate it, and then drag that out in front. And again, we've got the vector plugged into the vector. So, sorry, I'm just checking my notes. We now need to start changing the scale of a few things. So not in this first mapping node, but this second one over here. So in the X scale, we're going to type in 3. In the Y, we're going to type in 3. And then in the Z, we are going to do 0.5. And you can see we've got these lines kind of running up and down, but it still doesn't really look anything like wood. So what do we need to do next? Let's start changing these Voronoi settings. So in the scale, we're going to increase that to, decrease that to 3.5. And then the detail, we're going to turn all the way up to 15. And the lacunarity, that sounds like a word. We're going to change that to 4. And then the randomness, we're going to change to 0. Now, it looks a bit more like wood grain, but not massively. So the next thing we need to do is add a noise texture. So we are going to Shift A, search for noise, and we're going to pop it in between this mapping node and the Voronoi texture. There we are. And now you can see straight away that's looking a bit more like wood. But again, we can change some settings around. So I just realized for the Voronoi, we actually want to change the scale to 7. Like such. And we're going to put the detail down to 0. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Put the lacunarity to 2 and the randomness to 1. There, that looks better. Now in the noise, that's where we need to change our scale to 3.5. And the detail, we're going to crank that all the way up to 15. The roughness, we're going to leave at 0.5. Then we're going to change this lacunarity to 4. And as you can see, that's looking quite a lot like wood. But we can still do better than that. So let's just scroll out, see what we're looking at. We are going to Shift A, add another noise texture. We're going to plug the mapping vector into the vector. Let's just scroll that down here. And let's just Control, Shift, and click that so we can see what that looks like. It doesn't really look like much of anything at the moment. But then again, we're going to add another Voronoi texture. So Shift A, search Voronoi. Voronoi. Shift A, search Voronoi. And then plug the factor into the vector. And then we want to make sure that at the moment the color is coming out. We don't want that. We want this distance. So let's just plug distance into the material output. And you can see kind of what we're doing here. Again, we need to change a few settings around. So in the noise, we're going to change our scale to 2.5. And then we're going to change the detail again all the way up to 15. And then the roughness, we're going to make it 0.45. The lacunarity, which is that a word? Doesn't sound like a word. We're going to change that to 4. Lovely. And then in the Voronoi, we're going to change the scale to 4. The detail to 0.2. Leave the roughness, lacunarity, and randomness at 1. Okie dokes. Again, we're going to move these out of the way. Let's move our principal BSDF out of the way. So we need to mix these textures together. So this, and let's scroll in so you can see, this one and this one we need to mix together. So we're going to do that by adding a mix node. So let's go Shift A, search for a mix. Now I can never remember, is it a mix color? Let's try mix. Yeah, it's a mix color. A mix color node. Is it a mix color node? Yes, it is. Okie dokes. Now we want to change. Sorry, I'm referring back to my notes. So here, where it says mix, we want to change that from mix to darken. And then we are going to take the distance out of the first Voronoi texture and plug that into color A. And then we're going to take the distance from the second Voronoi texture and plug that into color B. And then at the moment, nothing's changed because this is still plugged into our output. So we're going to grab our darken and then Control Shift click that. And then it takes a few seconds and there we go. Now we have a nice wood grain texture going up and down the columns, which I think looks rather snazzy. But we're still not done. So at the moment, the wood is looking a bit uniform. Let's also change the factor of this darken from 0.5 all the way over to 1. That's lovely. And again, we're going to give ourselves a little bit more room. So let's grab our principal BSDF and our material output. Let's just move that over there. So now what we need to do is create the knots in the wood. Hope you're following along so far. Just to give you a refresh of what we've done so far, if you want to see it, texture coordinates into the mapping, into another mapping. Then we've got 2 separate noise and Voronoi textures. If you want to see the settings, there they are. Let me just make sure that everything there is correct. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And then we're going to mix it with this noise and Voronoi here. Going into a darken, so a mix color node set to darken. And that's going into just our material output at the moment. So the next thing we're going to do is create the knots in the wood. And it's a very, very similar procedure. So let's go up here and we're going to Shift A, search for another Voronoi texture. And we're going to take the vector from this first mapping node into the vector of the Voronoi. And we're going to change, let's Control Shift T so we can see what we're doing. There. And then we are going to change the scale to 14. And now we've got all these little spots. It looks a bit like a Dalmatian. Detail we can leave at 0. Roughness we can leave at 0.5. We're going to change from F1 here to smooth F1. There we go. And then we are going to leave this on Euclidean. Now we've got this little extra option over here called smoothness, which is what we need, but we're going to leave that at default. And then, let's scroll out, we are going to add a color ramp. So we're going to Shift A, search for color, spelt the stupid American way, color ramp, and drag that after the distance. Now this will allow us to change the contrast between the white and the black levels. So what we need to do is drag our white handle about halfway back. Maybe let's make it about 0.6. And then we are going to drag our black handle over here towards the center, like such. And that just increases the contrast between those, making it a little bit more visible. And now what we need to do is add another mix color. So this is where it gets a bit complicated, so bear with me on this one. We're going to go Shift A and then search for another mix color. Drag that after the color ramp. So it's plugged into color A. Now that's not what we want. We're going to change that and plug it into color B, which looks exactly the same. Now, bear with me on this. We are going to take the vector output of this mapping node here, and then we're going to drag it into color A of this mix color that we've just created. Now, that looks really, really silly at the moment, and I'm hoping that what I do next will fix this. Let's just change that to factor. We're going to drag that down to 0. And then we're going to change it from mix to linear light. And that's not fixed it. Why has that not fixed it? So that's going to there, and that's going up there. Oh, I know why that's not fixed it. It's actually doing what we need it to do. Okay, so now we're going to do a Shift A, search for another noise texture, and we're going to plug the linear light into that noise texture. There we are. And instead of the output being the color, we're going to change it to the factor. So easiest way of doing that, we're just going to Control Shift click that again. And now you can see we've got this kind of fuzzy black and white. Blender is very, very confusing with its nodes. Actually, it's not. I'm just a bit rubbish at them. Now we need to change the settings of this noise texture. So we're going to change the scale. We're going to whack that all the way up to 20. Make those bits nice and small. Detail, we're going to whack up to 15. Going to leave the roughness the same, the lacunarity the same, and the distortion the same at 0. And then we need to add another color ramp. So we're going to go Shift A, search for a color ramp, plop that afterwards. And again, we need to increase the contrast. So we're going to drag the black handle almost all the way to the center and the white handle almost all the way to the center. You can experiment with this, but we want these big blotches and patches. And we're still not done. So now let's go back to where we were previously. After this first color ramp, we need to add another color ramp. Why? I don't know. It's just what I've been told to do. So we're going to go Shift A, search for a color ramp. We're going to take the color into the factor, and then we're going to whack this black value up nice and high. And maybe that's a bit too high. Drag this white value down. And then we need to add another mix color. So we're going to go Shift A, search for a mix color. We are going to change that to linear light again. So under mix, where it says mix, just change that to linear light. And we want to plug, let's just move this a little bit over here. We want to plug the color from the color ramp into color A. And then we want to grab the color from this color ramp over here into the factor. So we're going to be basically using this color ramp as a mask to control this. So let's drag color into factor. And now for this color B, At the moment, it's just kind of gray. Let's click that. We're going to change that to black. And I just realized you can't see it because I haven't actually plugged this into anything. So let's just Control-Shift-Click this linear light. So now we have a lot of contrasty splodges. And splodges is a very technical word that we use in 3D modeling. Remember that. Okay. So we've got a bit more work left to do. Hope you're all following along okay. So next thing we need to do is add another mix color. So we're going to go Shift-A, search for a mix color. We're going to drag that between this set of nodes up here. Oop, get off. And this set of nodes down here. So this is our wood grain, if you remember. And these are our little splodges. Now, what we need to do is mix these two together, and we're going to do it using this mix shader here. Let's just go back to my notes. So what we need to do is change it from mix to lighten, and then we are going to drag this color mix color node here into A, and then we're going to take the output of this mix color, drag that down into the factor, and then we need to change, in fact we need to leave color B exactly the same, but let's just Control-Shift-Click on that, wait for it to update, and now you can see we've got wood grain, but we've also got these little, it looks like knots in the wood, and that is exactly what we want. So it's going all the way up and down these columns, but we're still not done. So now we need to start coloring it in. So we're going to do this by going to Shift-A, search for a color ramp. We're going to drag that in between the mix color node and the output. Boop. And then we're going to use this to control the placement of the colors. So we are going to do that by adding another mix color node. So Shift-A, search mix color, and drag that in between. And we're going to plug the color ramp into the factor. So unplug it from A. Now this is where we get to decide what colors we want. And also what we'll also need to do. In fact, I'll show you after we're doing it. So into color A, that's what we want to put in our nice TARDIS blue. So I've done a bit of Googling, and it looks like the hex code is here. So that's 003B6F. So we're going to go back into here and go color A, type in 003-6BF. And there we are. Now you can see we've got this lovely TARDIS blue color coming up. To me, it looks a little bit blue. Oh, that's because it's B6F. 003-B6F. That looks more TARDIS-y. Now, rather counterintuitively, we want to copy that color into color B as well. So you can just click and drag. There we are. And now it looks awful because it's the same color. But then what we can do is go into color B, click that, and let's just drag the color down a little bit and maybe desaturate it a little bit. So you don't want it to be too different, but just different enough that you can see the differences in the wood grain. And I think that looks rather nice. Now, we can use this color ramp to control how much of each color we see. So if we drag in the white handle, that's basically representing color B. If we drag in the black handle, that's representing color A. Now, you don't want to do too much. And I'd also recommend changing it from linear to ease. And again, wait for it to update. And then let's just drag that out, maybe to about there. You can play around with this as much as you want. But that looks rather nice. Now, let's make our life easier. Let's plug the mix color into the base color of our principal BSDF. Like so. And then let's Control-Shift-Click our principal BSDF. And again, wait for it to update. There we go. Now, it's really shiny, and that's controlled by the roughness of our principal shader. Now, what I want to do is make some parts shiny and other parts less shiny. Easy way of doing that, we're going to use the result of this mix color again. we're going to add another color ramp. So Shift A, search for a color ramp. We're going to drag the result into the factor of the color ramp, and then we're going to plug this color ramp into the roughness slot of the principal BSDF. And at the moment, when it updates, it looks really weird and shiny. And that's because it's way too contrast heat. So all the black parts of this color ramp will be seen as really, really shiny. All the white parts will be seen as really, really rough. So, I mean, it's an interesting look, but it's a weird look. So what we want to do is click on this black handle, and on the color down here, we're going to drag that to a very, very light gray. So not completely white, not completely black, but quite a light gray. Like so. And then we're going to take this white handle here and just drag it so it's a slightly grayer white. And you can play around with this as much as you need. This is still probably a bit too shiny, actually, so let's drag that handle back. And that looks pretty good. But it also looks completely flat. So wood, as you know, has a grainy texture to it. So how are we going to add that? Well, again, we're going to use this node here, and we're going to use a Shift A, search for a bump node. So let's just drag that down there. And we're going to drag the result of this, whatever I've called it, mixed color node, into the height of the bump node here. So not into the normal, but into the height. And then we're going to drag the normal into the normal of our principal BSDF. Wait for it to update. Have you been? Yeah, I've been well. Good, good. Done anything nice? Read any good books? No? There we go. Now, this is too bumpy. So let's control that by, what have I done in this one? Let's see, because I was quite happy with my settings in my little example I made for myself. We are going to drag the strength down to 0.35. There we go. I'm going to change the roughness a little bit as well. So let's drag this handle back here, and let's just drag in this white handle there. And maybe let's just increase the strength of the bump to about 0.45. There we are. That looks pretty good. That just gives it a little bit of texture. Cool. Okay. So what we have here is our vertical wood. So what we want to do is start applying this to the whole model. And then when we've done that, we can start adding the horizontal wood. So easiest way of doing it, if we, let's hide the bits we don't want to apply this to. So let's hide our police box sign. Let's hide our text. Let's hide our St. John's ambulance sign. Let's hide our windows. So I'm just clicking and pressing H. Let's hide our handles. Let's hide our key. And let's hide the lamp. Okay. I think this is how you do it. So we're going to press A to select everything. And then we are going to click our poles here. So shift click the poles that we've applied the texture to. And then we're going to press Control and L. And we're going to link materials. There we are. And now let's Alt H to unhide everything. Now, we need to do a bit of tidying up because at the moment all the wood is going in the same direction. So it looks good for the vertical bits, but obviously looks really, really strange for the horizontal bits. So how do we fix that? So we are going to have to do this object by object. So let's start by clicking the doors. We're going to tab into edit mode, double tap A, make sure everything's deselected, and press 3 for face mode. Now we want to select all the bits going horizontally. So it can be a bit tedious, but we're going to shift click, 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 and shift click and shift click. And then we are going to go over to our materials settings over here. We're going to press this plus button to add a new material slot. And then in this drop-down list here, we are going to pick our TARDIS wood vertical again. Why are you doing that? Bear with me. And then over here, we're going to click what it says new material. And it's going to rename it to TARDIS wood vertical.001. We're going to rename that to TARDIS wood horizontal. And then press assign. Now at the moment, everything looks exactly the same. And we need to sort the direction. We can actually tab back into object mode by going over to our mapping. That's going to be in our first mapping node. And I can never remember which direction. So is it X? Nope. Y? Yes. We need to change our Y rotation to 90. And that's just going to align everything on the horizontal plane. Now, we need to do this for all of the horizontal wood. So you're more than welcome to watch as I do it. It's not going to be particularly interesting. But let's just click our base, tab into edit mode. In fact, for this one, we can just to select everything. We don't even need to do this in edit mode. Let's just tab out of that. Get rid of our TARDIS wood vertical over here. It goes white. And then from our drop-down list, go TARDIS wood horizontal. There we are. And then for our sign boxes, let's tab into edit mode. Let's 3 for face select. We're going to grab this top one here. We're going to select this one and this one and the one underneath if we can get there. This one here. We're going to press plus and then we're going to add our TARDIS wood horizontal and press assign. There we are. And then we need to do it for the roof as well. So grab our roof. Let's get rid of this TARDIS wood vertical and TARDIS wood horizontal. There we go. And now just to add a bit of variety at the top here, let's tab into edit mode. We're going to shift click this face and shift click this face. We're going to press plus and then we're going to add our TARDIS wood horizontal and assign that. Vertical. Vertical and assign that. Just to give it a little bit of interest at the top there. And that is it for the TARDIS wood grain. So you can mess around with it as much as you want. But I think that looks rather nifty. Okay, we've done the most complicated material, so everything else now is pretty straightforward. Let's do... Oh, we still need to do the sign box here, sorry. So let's tab into edit mode. We're going to shift click this face and this face, and then new material slot, and then just grab TARDIS wood horizontal and assign that. There we go. Yeah, that looks better. Cool. So we are going to grab this sign here. So what have I called it? The PTO sign. We're going to delete TARDIS wood vertical. And we're going to create a new material. And let's call it PTO sign. And this is going to be a pretty straightforward one. So we're going to, in our shading workflow, we're going to Shift A, search for a noise texture. And then let's just Control Shift T that so we can see what it's doing. And then Control T to add a mapping node and texture coordinates. We're going to change it from generated to object. And then in our scale over here, let's just drag that down. In fact, drag it up, sorry. So we want these blotches to be a little bit smaller. Change the detail to about 10 and change the roughness to 1. And what we're doing here is just basically creating a bunch of little micro dirty particle bits. And then we're going to Shift A, search for a color ramp. Boop. And let's just make it a little bit more contrasty. And let's change the scale actually to something a bit bigger, maybe about, let's go 3. And change the roughness to 0.5 again. No, 0.7. That's fine. But it's too dark. We want this to be quite subtle. We're just basically griming it up a little bit. So we're going to grab this black handle, click on the color, and just make it slightly more gray. Like such. That should be fine. Drag that out. And then we're going to plug the color ramp into the base color. And then on the principal BSDF, we're just going to Control Shift and click that. There we go. And let's also plug that into the roughness. There you go. It's a subtle effect, but it just gives it a little bit more realism. Cool. That's that one done. And then we are going to do the metal bits. So door handles and the keyholes. So let's just click one of them. And we're going to create a new material. And let's just call it plain metal. And in our principal BSDF, we are going to change the metallic to 1. And to be honest, if you're feeling quite boring, you can leave that there. But let's make it a bit more interesting. So we're going to Shift A, search for a noise texture. And then we're going to Control T that. And again, we're going to change the texture coordinates to object. Boop. And let's just Control Shift and click that so we can see what it's doing. Let's change the scale to a bit bigger, like 15. Let's do bigger than that. Let's do 50. There we are. And again, we want to add a color ramp. So Shift A, search for a color ramp, drag that in between, and let's make it a bit more contrasty. Let's just zoom in so we can see a bit more contrasty. Let's whack the scale up to 100. There, that's better. And let's change this from being black to a lighter gray. I'm going to cough. Still not well. And let's grab this handle here and make it slightly darker. There we are. And we're going to plug that into the roughness. Like so. And then let's just Control-Shift-Click our principal BSDF. There we are. And that's still too shiny. So let's just increase. There we are. That's good. Cool. Happy with that. And let's just add plain metal to the other handle. And this key here. Plain metal. Cool. I'm going to darken it down a little bit. So in its base color, let's just make it a little bit darker. And again, I'm going to just drag the handle here. Because again, we want this to be quite a subtle detail. That should be okay. Cool. So the next thing I'd like to do is the texture for the windows. Now, they've had a couple of different looks over the series, but I'm going to stick with a kind of traditional, hopefully not too strange looking one. So let's grab our windows. We're going to add a new texture. We're going to call it Windows Black. Sorry, I've got a reference open. Windows Black. Now, you think what we want to do is add a glass, but we don't, because if we add a glass, we'll just see straight through. So what we're going to do is change its base color to almost black, not quite black. We're going to change its roughness. In fact, we're going to leave its roughness basically the same. And then what I want to do is in our principal BSDF, I'm going to go down to coat. I'm going to add a clear coat, drag the weight to 1. And then in its roughness, let's keep that maybe about a 0.15-ish. Maybe a little bit rougher. Let's change it to a 0.25. So it's still got some reflection, but it's not really obvious. Maybe change its roughness here to about 0.3. How does that look? 0.4. We can tweak that later. Now, what I also want to do is the old trusty Shift-A, search for a noise texture. And then we're going to Control-T and change it to Object. And then let's Control-Shift-Click that. Let's add a color ramp. Drag that in between. Let's just move that out of the way. And let's just make it a bit more contrasty. Now, what I want to do is, in fact, the scale is pretty good, but I'm going to increase the roughness to about a 0.75. And let's change the detail to about 5. That works well. And then I'm going to take this color ramp and I'm going to plug it into the roughness. And let's just Control-Shift-Click the Principal BSDF. And I think that looks a lot better. Yeah, so we have different patches of roughness. I'm going to change it from black to a lighter gray. Yeah, I think that looks more realistic. That looks like dirty glass. Cool. And then we need to make the lower windows. Right, let's tab into edit mode again. In fact, let's press backslash to isolate that. And then go 1 for front view. And let's go into viewport shading wireframe just to make sure we're selecting all the right bits. 3 for face mode. And let's just drag a box around this one, and then shift click and drag a box around this one. And then we're going to add a new material. And then again, we're going to add Windows black and then press assign. And then we're going to rename that. So new material here to Windows white. Let's just press backslash again so we can see the whole thing and go back to material preview. And in its base color, all we need to do is just change that to almost white. Not fully white, but almost white. There we are. That should do it. That's probably a bit too white, actually. Let's just wipe that down just a little, like so. And I just remembered we need to change the color of these frames as well. So let's grab our window frames. Let's delete TARDIS wood vertical. And we're going to create a new material just called window frames. And if I remember rightly, it's a sort of plasticky PVC thing. So let's just drop it down to slightly off-white. And just change the roughness. We don't really need to do anything to these unless you're planning on having some massive close-ups. But that should be it. Cool. So the last thing we need to do is work on the materials for the lamp. So let's zoom into that. And we want to create a blue metal for the base, the housing, the little spokes, and its little hat. So let's do that. So let's click on the hat, press new, and call it blue metal. And it's quite a rough metal, so let's change it to metallic. Let's leave it like that for the minute. Let's change its base color to that TARDIS blue, which I now can't remember. Do I have it still up? Yes, I do. 003B6F. 003B6F. There we are. Now let's maybe lighten that up just a little bit. Like that. But that's way too shiny. So we're going to Shift A, search for a noise texture. We're going to Control T, change its texture coordinates to object. And then let's Control Shift click. Let's change its scale to 50. That's about right. Let's change its detail to about 5 and roughness to about 0.8. Yeah, that looks good. And then we're going to add a color ramp, drag that in, and let's move the handles like so and make that a little bit grayer. Oops, like that. Let's move that out of the way. And we're going to add that into the roughness. And let's just Control-Shift-Click our Principal BSDF. That's still a bit shiny. There we go. Let's decrease that handle a little bit and move the white handle in. That's too much. That should do it. That should do it. And then we're also going to Shift A, search for a bump. We're going to take the factor from the noise texture, plug that into the height, and then plug the normal into the normal channel. Wait for that to update. That looks pretty good. Let's just change its strength down to 0.6. Lovely. And then we're going to take that material. We're going to click the spokes, add blue metal. The housing, add blue metal. That's actually maybe a little bit saturated. Let's just drop the saturation of that a wee bit to about 0.8. And then we want it for this bit here as well. Blue metal. Lovely. I'm still not hugely happy with that. Let's darken it a little bit and then desaturate it a little bit more. Again, you can play around with this. That looks all right. And let's do our lens glass. So let's grab the lens. Now, you'd think the easiest thing to do would be to just add a glass material. No, no, my friend. Let's just press new and call it lens. And let's delete the principal BSDF. And we're going to Shift A, search for a mix shader. And then we're going to Shift A, we're going to search for a transparent BSDF. Is that the one I need? Hold on. No, it's not. Sorry, what we need is Shift A, search for a glossy BSDF. And then we're going to drag that into the bottom part of the shader. Let's just Control Shift and click that so we can see. And now we need Shift A, search for a transparent BSDF. And then we're going to drag that to this top part here. Now it looks a bit weird at the moment. What we need to do is Shift A and search for a layer weight node. And now what we need to do here is drag the facing into this factor. Now it looks a little bit weird. I'll show you. If I put the blend all the way up to 1, can't see anything. And if I drag the blend all the way down to 0, it's completely transparent. What this node does is any part that's directly facing the camera will be transparent and all the edges will be more opaque. So we need to fine tune that. So I'm going to make it about a 0.85. That looks pretty good. And let's change the frosted, because this is a frosted glass, let's change the roughness here to maybe about a 0.8. Again, we can tweak this a little bit later, but at the moment that looks okay. And let's just change the color, drop it down just a little bit. That should be all right. That's good. And then the last thing we're going to do is add a material to this light inside. So let's just hide our lens glass, grab this bulb. First thing we need to, there we go. First thing we need to do is add the metal to it. So we're going to just click our little drop down here, plain metal, that's good. And then let's go 1 for front orthographic, tab into edit mode. Let's grab our wireframe, just double tap A to make sure everything's deselected. We are going to drag a box, 3 for face mode, and then just drag a box around these faces. And then we're going to press new material, and then new again. And we're going to call it lens flash and assign that. Let's go back into material preview. So at the moment, just a big white ball. So again, let's get rid of this here principal BSDF. We're going to Shift A and search for a mix shader. Drag that there and drag the output to the surface. And then we're going to Shift A. We're going to add an emission shader and plug that into the bottom. And in the top, we're going to Shift A and add a diffuse BSDF. And then we're going to plug that into the top. And let's change its roughness, color to something a lot darker. Let's just drag this factor down so you can see. That should be fine. Increase the roughness a little bit. No, that's not. So when this factor is set to 0, there ain't no light. When this factor is set to 1, it's fully emissive. And we can blend between. So when it's doing this, how's that for a TARDIS impression? Then we can animate that in with a sound file, or we can do it manually, whatever's easier. Let's change that to 0.5. I'm going to change the strength of the emission to 2. At the moment, it still looks a bit poo, but we can fix that later. And let's just Alt-H, unhide everything. And let's go back into layout. And if I press material preview, we've got ourselves a fully textured TARDIS. And I think that looks rather good. Now, I do know this has been pretty tricky to follow along with. There's a lot of nodes going on. Hopefully it's made sense. The last thing I will show you how to do is get this light to glow properly. So if we go to, let's see, does this work here? This little drop down here, we're going to change, you see where it says compositor, we're going to change that from disabled to always. Now everything looks exactly the same. Let's go over to compositing. And we're going to press new. And let's just drag some space. Let's drag this window up here. We're going to change this from timeline. So go over to this little icon here. We're going to change that to 3D viewport. And let's just drag around, get a nice view of the TARDIS. We're going to press material preview. And then again, we're going to change compositor to always. We're going to Shift A. And we're going to search for a glare node. And drag that over there. At the moment, it doesn't really look like anything. Let's just zoom into the light so we can see. And we're going to change it from streaks to bloom. And then let's drop down highlights. Let's change the threshold to maybe about 0.4. And let's click on our light here. Let's change the... let's do a ridiculously high number. Let's change the strength of the emission to 10 or 100. There we go. Now that's obviously way too much, but you can see what it's doing. So if I drag between 0 and 1, we've got a nice flashy light there. But I'm going to change the strength to 2. Cool. Actually, now the one last thing I would like to do, let's go back into our shading. We're going to grab this police box sign, which is a texture at the moment. We're going to Shift A. We're going to search for another noise. And then we're going to control, we're going to hold it up. Click it, press Control T. Change it from generator to object. And that's Control Shift click that. Zoom in so we can see. We are going to scale that to maybe about 8. Change the detail to about 10. And roughness to about 0.75. That's fine. And then we're going to Shift A, search for a color ramp again. And drag that in like so. And make it more of a gray than a black. And we're going to plug that color into the roughness slot. And let's just Control Shift click that roughness. So now our sign boxes have a little bit more interest rather than just being a flat surface. And then what I also want to do is go down to the coat, change the weight to 1, and let's just bump up the roughness to about 0.8. And that just gives it a little bit more interesting reflectivity. And I think we's done. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. That looks really cool. We've got all the wood grain. We've got a lot of differences in the textures to keep it interesting. All of our materials have nice natural roughnesses to them. Yeah. So hopefully you've been able to follow along with that. Do drop me a message if you need any help. And in the next video, we're going to be UV unwrapping and baking it. Because at the moment, all these procedural textures, Blender might be getting a little bit overwhelmed. And I've just realized that we also need to change these to wood horizontal. So let's just do that now. Wood horizontal sign. There we go. That looks better. Cool. So this has been a very long video, but hopefully it's been useful for you. Hopefully you've got something that looks like a TARDIS. You can play around with it as much as you want. And I'd really love to see what you're doing. So please do send me links to everything that you're working on. Please do keep liking, sharing, subscribing. And I'll see you guys again very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.